Right, hi everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Vivienne Coombes, I'm one of the disability advisors, and this is my colleague Irene, also a disability advisor. So over this sort of hour, 50 minutes, we're hoping it's going to be a question and answer session, sort of quite informal. I'm sure you've got lots of queries. We were briefly going to talk about the role of the disability service, alternative assessment and the digital accessibility regulations. Okay. So I just thought, just very briefly, I mean, the Equality Act forms the basis of everything we do, and you know, that's one of our main responsibilities in ensuring the university meets its legal requirements towards students with disabilities. And I think here the key words are anticipate the need and be proactive about providing support for students with disabilities to ensure that they can participate fully in all aspects of university life. So if we can just go on and talk about how we as a service sort of support students. So any student who wants to register with the disability service, we ask that they provide medical evidence with regard to their medical condition or their specific learning difficulty. And we support students with a whole range of physical conditions, mental health, and specific learning difficulties. And what we're finding is that year on year numbers are increasing, but also the complexity of students' needs are increasing. And you will often find, and increasingly so, that students will have more than one diagnosis. And just to give an example, I mean, last year at this time, we had about 30 odd disclosures of students on the autistic spectrum, and this year already we're up to about 70. So, and that's just one group. So we are, and mental health is just, just off the scale really with the increase. Now, up until about 3 years ago, we always support students, we always encourage students to apply for the Disabled Student Allowance. Is everybody familiar with the Disabled Student Allowance is a government fund, it's non-means tested, and any student with a disability is eligible to apply for that fund. They will have a needs assessment, and there are assessment centres all over the country, and they will then produce a written document which will describe the challenges that a student might experience and also make recommendations about the support that they should have. There's also funding available, and they'll look at whether a student needs any IT software or IT equipment or non-medical helper support, which includes things like mentoring, study skills support. Up until about 3 years ago, they would fund note-taking support, but now the university is responsible for funding that. They may also look at, in certain circumstances, they may provide funding towards travel to and from university. Is there anything? That's it really, I think. Yeah.
Did you mention IT equipment?
Yes, yeah. And also, with non-medical helper support, it'll be things like, if somebody needs a sign language interpreter, anything like that. And as I say, up until 3 years ago, oh, sorry.
Right, I was just wondering, how would we know if a student's registered with the disability service?
Well, it depends. Usually, most students will have an inclusive support plan. So, and that would be the way that you would know, really, that you would be given that information. But we may have students who've decided not to have an inclusive support plan and might not need one.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically it would be through the inclusive support plan.
So if if I have a student who I recognise that they have support needs, but I can't check them. There's no register I can check. I have to, if I haven't been notified, then they would not have.
Well, they might have registered, but they won't have an inclusive support plan. The only checking mechanism would be the inclusive support plan and talking with the student.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think confidentiality reasons we would make this available to everyone, but it's absolutely fine to contact us, and if we can't tell you, we'll tell you we can't tell you. But you can also recommend us to the student. Quite often students come to us via academic advisors and other academics, which is really helpful.
It's probably worth saying what we do. Any student who discloses a disability on their UCAS form, we will contact over the summer prior to them starting, and try and make sure that things are in place ready for when they start. That's not without its challenges. We still get a lot who turn up without having sort of engaged in that process. But we also will have disclosures right throughout the year, and that's typically often we find students with mental health problems. And I think often, students come to university wanting a fresh start, they're hoping things are going to be different, and then it's not until the pressures build up, often over that first semester, and then they'll get in touch with us. But yeah, we always try and, aim to have that contact before they start. And some people are really proactive, and we'll have had a couple of meetings with them. But even it is quite surprising, even people with very complex needs sometimes just won't think to, be in touch really. And just to say about the disabled student allowance, so in the past, that was how any reasonable adjustments were funded really. They, as I say, they used to fund note-taking support, they used to fund if people needed any particular accommodation arrangements, then they would provide funding towards that. But what happened about 3 years ago was the emphasis shifted really, and the emphasis is now on universities to provide most of that support, whereas the disabled student allowance will only make funding available for those more complex needs, or so it's been a huge shift in where the funding comes from and where the responsibility lies to make those reasonable adjustments. Anything you want to say about that?
No, that's fine.
So obviously, we then, once we've had that discussion with the student, looked at the medical evidence and any needs assessment that has been completed through the DSA process, then we will advise the university on what reasonable adjustments ought to be put in place, and that's usually via the inclusive support plan. Just to note, we're not sure what's going to happen 100%, but of course, as of September, when Banner is introduced, the way that information is circulated will change. And I think the idea is that, you'll be able to go log on to Banner and see it won't be a hard copy that's circulated via email, it will be there on the system.
Excuse me, does that mean that we have a responsibility to look at every student on our modules?
You will have lists. There should be a better flagging system on Banner.
So we won't have to search through?
No, you have a list of students that have any reasonable adjustments in place. I'm not clear yet, and I do urge you to ask the question, because my understanding is module leaders, and I think programme leads and subject coordinators will have access to the system, to the ISP or whatever it's going to be called. But I'm concerned about associate lecturers and how that information is going to be disseminated to those individuals. So I gather that academics, that they'll be training for the system, I think over the summer. But I think that that's an important question that we're certainly asking. And,
can I ask about, obviously at the start of the module, when hopefully most of the support plans that are in place, that's fine. But is there going to be some system whereby any need inclusive support plan is flagged to a module leader?
That's what we've asked, yeah, that there's some way on the system of flagging up either any new plan or any changes. Because that's the thing, you know, if plans get updated, it's how that's flagged as well.
With regard to consent, there, with this new system, at the moment, they do give consent who can access information. Because, of course, we're talking here about, I'm from HLS, so I'm talking more about placement practice, where it's very important that, as far as they can share these with what we call mentors or practice assessors in terms of supporting them. But sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't given consent, sometimes they're encouraged to actually disclose or discuss this information. I don't know where you are with regard to level of consent and how that's going to happen in the future.
Well, I mean, they've obviously, I think part of the concern about the new banner system and who has access is around consent, and obviously some of this is, you know, very personal, sensitive information. So I think there'll be systems in place, certainly for university staff, but where, if you're looking at placement staff and things, I'm not sure, I presume that would be a different confidentiality agreement.
Because at the moment the hard copies, with the hard copies, they give consent that is shared.
Yeah.
So that this happened.
Yeah, so they'll have to have some process whereby students consent that this information can be uploaded and shared.
Just how then they're able to access the system to see the information. That could be available.
Who's it?
I'm talking about our practice partners. I'm talking about
Yeah. And I presume, I don't know what the current arrangements are, I presume if they're external to the university, you must have some sort of agreement.
Well, we
with
have
them.
a partnership. We work as partners, but of course, there's our confidential information is also a different organisation in terms of how they share.
Yeah, that, you know, is clearly a concern. So as well as the ongoing course arrangements, there are exam arrangements which I'm going to talk in more detail about alternative assessment, and on the banner system the exam arrangements will be there alongside other reasonable adjustments that need to be put in place. We do a lot of signposting and advice, you know, for students for support both within the university and externally to mental health services or other services that we feel might be appropriate. We do a lot of liaison with the accommodation service and ensuring that people are in appropriate accommodation. Risk assessments, we do a lot of those around mental health need and things like epilepsy. You know, physical conditions where there might be risk attached, and liaison with staff both within the university, various departments and external agencies where appropriate. So, any questions on any of that? Sorry.
Was that dyslexia?
Well, at the moment we're two separate teams, but obviously some students where they have quite complex needs and they have both a specific learning difficulty and a disability, then often one person will take a lead and we'll work together, and I think that will increase. I think the move is for our teams to work more. Well, we work closely together, but I think I think we'll have advisors who work across both teams. Sorry.
Looking at the disability service, does that deter students from seeking support from you?
I think it does, and I think often people with mental health difficulty will often not recognise themselves as having a disability. So it is an issue. I mean, it is something we've been talking about, you know, what our service should be called. And I mean, one of the latest ideas is inclusive support, but you know, that I think would create problems as well with all the, you know, other sort of connotations that has.
I think one of the problems is finding something that people will recognise and find acceptable that covers a very, very diverse group of students, because disability is one thing, like the other protective characteristics such as negative, but it's such a large range of things. And most universities do still have a disability service. So when new students are searching for what we offer, if we don't have a disability service, they may assume we don't have anything to offer. But at the same time, particularly mental health, it's not a department people necessarily want to come to. Other universities split, instead of splitting dyslexia or often disability, they split mental health, often have a mental health service and then a disability service. And with every option you go for, swings and roundabouts, but it's something we talk about a lot.
But, I mean, you could potentially have the two in terms of labels, but they end up functioning as they're sort of two front ends of the same.
Yeah, and that's something we probably need to think about. So,
With regard to that question, and that was, we did a study with students within the pre-registration nursing program, mental health students with pre-existing mental illness, and that was a main feature in terms of the barrier, and also they also perceive it sort of kind of a stigma in terms of because it doesn't bode well with the principle with mental health of recovery, because they see themselves, well, I'm not disabled, and why am I now being labeled as disabled? And of course, so this service, by just having this, I know there was discussion about, I understand also the legality around what is that, how this is framed at the moment, and that's how the service is named. But I think there was also discussion about whether that could change or not, because it is a barrier for these students, and they still see this as something that's not for them. So,
And I think particularly in you know, courses where there's a fitness to study, fitness to practice requirement, you know, again that's another barrier. And, you know, we have our own discussions with Diana Galt and Sarah Khan about that whole process around occupational health clearance and our services, because that's the other thing people get confused with. I think sometimes they register with us and don't appreciate they need to go through the occupational health clearance as well. And it doesn't help that both services have got wellbeing in their name, which I think causes confusion.
But just going back to that question about students being put off and coming to our service because of the name, if you find the specific students that's the case, that's really helpful feedback for us to have, because we'll never meet those students who don't come to us because they don't want to be associated with our name. So it's useful for us to know that. Not necessarily specific student names, but just the general feeling. If that's something you feel is a problem, we can then feed that back and have further discussions about how we present ourselves to be accessible to the widest number of students we can.
yeah, there is some discussion going on with the student coordinator, support coordinator, Martha, is leading on that, and there are discussions happening at the moment, I understand, in terms of how we can make this more accessible and look at everything in terms of how things are at the moment. So, of course, yeah, there are discussions going on.
Yeah, we work closely with, you know, the student support coordinators across the university.
Is this a good moment for me to pick up the query we had about class tests?
Oh yes, yeah.
So we're very much aware that when it comes to exams, you can just hand over all the disability arrangements to the exams office, whereas when it comes to class tests, the module leader is responsible for making the arrangements, which could be just extra time, but it might be individual room, it might be a reader, it might be a scribe to write for the person. That's the way it is. We're not really happy with that arrangement. We think that's a lot of responsibility for the module leader when you're already busy, but we haven't been able to kind of change that. But we did have a query about if that's the case, can you please have the inclusive support plan as early as possible so that you can get the arrangement in place as early as possible? And I think the answer to that is we will get that plan to you as soon as we can. Current system is it goes via student records, but it's fairly quick, hopefully, if we have seen the student. Often we haven't seen the student, and therefore we can't get the information to you.
I think the other hand as well is often we're waiting on medical evidence, which can take, it's a real issue. Getting, from GPs, it can be held up. The quality of some of the evidence we get is really poor. So, that can be quite a complex, lengthy process.
Yeah. And just that everything we do has to be based on medical evidence, because obviously we can't diagnose, we can't judge without that. But I think it's also worth noting that the exams office have a rule which says if the student hasn't got all the information together, we haven't produced the ISP and they haven't received it by week 8, they will not put any exam arrangements in place. End of story. So if you're getting an ISP and the class test is in 2 days' time, it would be great if you can make those arrangements, obviously, but if you can't, you have got the right to say, actually, sorry, I can't do this. If someone's making a request which is unreasonable, it might then be, we need to look at whether the student can retake the class test later. But we do recognise that's an area of pressure, and it may be you need to say no if it's not.
So we do weekly or fortnightly. They're officially in-class tests,
Okay.
but the students have the time in which they can do them isn't just like, so for example, if their practical class was on a Wednesday, they'd have until like the following Monday to complete that. Do we need to be, so we haven't, because we've got this extended period of time for everybody, do those students with ISPs, we meant to be doing something different for them, because they've got the ability to do it at home on their own, they've got the ability to...
And is it online and they have to do it?
It's all online.
Does the computer specify how long they can do it?
No, they've got, they can come back to it whenever they want.
Then if their ISP says they need extra time, I think that's fine. I think that would
But like in a room on their own and those kinds of things.
But if we,
Well, if they can do it at home, then that would usually solve that problem.
I suppose the problem would be if you then start to say that is technically coursework rather than a test, the student could argue, well, if the student gets extra time to complete coursework, they could ask for extra time. So we probably need to be really careful about defining where is it test or coursework, which is...
They're called in-class assessments, but they come under...
And obviously, it's always
all
going to be
coursework, it's not an
coursework
exam.
rather than
It's
exam.
coursework rather than exam, but
Yeah.
it's called an in-class assessment.
I think if I were working with a student in that situation and want to obviously look at the student's individual circumstances, but also be quite pragmatic. So if the student realistically gets extensions for coursework and gets extra time in the exam, but they're not really going to benefit from handing it in on Wednesday instead of Monday, I'm possibly going to be disadvantaged because then they're kind of playing catch up.
They're always going to be in it.
I would be pushing to say, look, let's treat it like an exam. You've got as much time as you need, and leave it like that. But you might have some students arguing for extra time on the ground.
I haven't.
Yeah, we certainly have.
We have had issues where I think, it does
We haven't had
cause
any students say
for
to
some
us that they are experiencing that problem.
I think it's helpful in that situation to present it as a test where the exam concessions would apply. And as you say, they've got all the time they need to take extra time. If they've got an issue accessing the computer and there's kind of digital accessibility, look at that separately, but not for extra time.
I do think, often a conversation with the student, it's worth having because, most of the time, I think students are very reasonable and very anxious that they don't take advantage of the system. So I think often having that conversation is useful.
And also obviously feel free to come back to us or whoever's name is called to us if it's not clear.
I think the other thing about in-class tests, we're very conscious as, people, there seem to be more requests, sometimes for individual rooms, which can be a real issue, and obviously then the need for more invigilators, if, depending on what the assessment is. And you can always contact the exams office. They have a list of staff who act as invigilators, but I'm presuming the department then bears the cost. Yeah. But, they do have people available if need be. We have, I've been at Brooks, I think it's been about 10 years, and this has been an ongoing issue in class tests, and they've talked over the years about having, reviewing it, and it's just never happened. But I think the numbers are such that does need looking at really. And whether now with the changes to the exams, the exam arrangements, whether there's more capacity within the exams office to help with in-class tests, I don't know.
It is often about definitions. I've got a similar situation in a way, but perhaps a bit more constraining, in that I've often got students doing in-class assessments within the time frame of the class, so 3 hours.
Right.
But it's not a test, it's just that work they have to do in class.
Right, yeah. So that come under course, would it?
And are they assessed on that then?
Yeah, it's all part of the assessment.
Yeah.
So it's about definition, and it wouldn't be appropriate to give them extra time, because the whole point of doing it in class is to ensure that they've done it.
It does get, and we appreciate, I mean, group work, and assessments, being assessed as a group, I mean, that has all sorts of challenges. We're not, we are mindful of this stuff.
Is the university putting in extra resources given that there will be no more semester 1 exams
Extra resources for?
to cover assessments?
Well, they're saying that they shouldn't be replaced by more in-class tests, I think, aren't they? That needs to be managed.
In Scott's recommendation for a 24-hour or 48-hour exam removed.
Oh, what was
I think, I'm not sure that was his recommendation.
One of the
It was
options,
that was given that the only thing we can do is in-class tests, then is his sort of compromise.
So what would that count as? Would that count as an in-class test? Or
I think if it was a 24-hour exam, we would apply exam arrangements like that, wouldn't we?
Well, that's what that's what we do now, where the courses have 24-hour exams. It will come into the exams.
So will they get an extra hour?
Actually, 24-hour exams have apparently been banned in some universities because of the pressure of the student then working straight 24 hours.
I think
we'd be
48
needing
was
to
his
look at-
preference. That's in my memory, but that was
or 12, or call it 10, some people to 12.
The answer is no, then no extra support.
Not that we're aware of. No. It we say it is an issue that comes up and we'll try to raise, but it's ongoing.
Question 5.
Yeah, with regard to practice learning, I want to come back to because we're talking about challenges. In my previous role as placement lead, one of the challenges I face myself is when I look at the ISP, the expectation that sometimes the person who faces this, I don't think have a good appreciation, understanding of the environment. I'm talking about mental health students here, the environment where these students will be on placement, because there are certain things that are asked that you can never guarantee that will ever happen. And we've had to go back and say, I'm sorry, but that is not possible.
I think it's fine. We'd rather have a conversation around it than it not being implemented. So I think if you do see stuff that it isn't possible to implement, that you do come back to us. I think what we've tried to do is, where possible, is liaise with either a member of academic staff and say, look, these are the things we're looking at. Will this work? And obviously that's how we'd like to work. But if people don't come back to us, we're not going to know what the issues are.
Yeah, we've had meetings. I've met with learning disability about as well. We've had meetings about this. But it was, as I say, it's a time when you get the ISP and then you respond to it. And because we have a time frame, of course, the students going on placement. And like you pointed out earlier, sometimes these were not even in place. But then again, it was because of the student being disclosed. And there are numerous challenges with regard to this, and it's really looking at, that's why I organize a meeting, looking how we work together and ensuring that as far as we try to accommodate these, but at the same time being realistic about what is going to be acceptable or not acceptable to our practice partners.
Yeah, and that's part of the meetings with Diana Galt and Sarah Khan that I mentioned, that we are hoping to tighten up on that process. But it is, it's, you know, we all work within certain constraints. But we're always happy to have that conversation.
Do you want to
Yeah.
So I'm just going to talk briefly about definition of alternative assessment, give you some of the background over the last 10 years, how things have changed, talk you through the university regulations, describe current practice and open up for discussion. But before I start, can I take a quick show of hands? Has anybody had a direct request from a disability advisor for an alternative assessment for a student? Okay, so just 1, 2, okay. And has anyone been involved in discussions around alternative assessment for a specific student? Yeah, okay. And is this something that's a general issue that everyone's aware of, or not particularly general at the moment for most people? But okay, that's helpful just for me to know where to pinch things. So just to give you a brief definition, when we talk about alternative assessment, what we mean is changing the method of assessment for a particular module because the student has a disability. That means they can't be assessed by whichever assessment has been chosen. So most commonly that will be issues with exams, where a student can't take the exam and needs an alternative. Second most often would be for an assessed presentation, probably looking at alternative. But it can also be about coursework, it could be about vibe, it can be about any kind of assessment that for whatever reason doesn't work for a particular student. At the moment, requests for alternative assessment are becoming much more common than they used to be. I've been here 11 years, and probably 10, 11 years ago it was really rare to have a request for an alternative assessment, and really much more rare to put it into place. I remember one about 10 years ago for sociology that went through. That's the only one I can remember. And in the last few years we've had a big increase in the number of requests for all sorts of reasons, partly changing practice within disability circles. Probably a big reason, something Viv mentioned earlier, is about students coming in with more than one disability, a range of complex disabilities, which mean that it's more difficult to make exams accessible. So when it comes particularly to exams,
well, sorry, the other thing is if students come and of course they've seen a lot of information across various universities, you know, and it is becoming more standard practice, sort of, you know, the offer of alternative assessment.
yeah, so I think student examinations
yeah.
also has an influence. Yeah. So when it comes to particular exams, we would always use alternative assessment as a last resort. We try and put in place whatever disability adjustments we can before we make the recommendation. And we would also base it on medical evidence, so we really need evidence to justify the decision we make. But there are times when whatever arrangements we put in place for the exam, we just can't make it fair for the student. So for example, if a student has a condition that causes a lot of pain and slows down their rate of working, you can add in extra time up to a point, but then it gets to a point where that's counterproductive because the student is in so much pain they can't think. And there's an issue about putting a student through a traumatic experience to make an exam if they're really physically or psychologically going to struggle to the point where it just becomes unfair. So that's the kind of time when we think of alternative assessment. With university regulations, you might already be aware, but just in case, they define quite carefully who has responsibility for what. So a student can only have an alternative assessment if it's recommended by a disability advisor. But the final say as to whether or not it goes ahead rests with what they call the examiners, which I presume comes out of the module leader. And the module leader has to work out, first of all, whether the objectives of the programme can be met with the alternative assessment, and whether the students can be assessed on equal terms with the other students with the alternative assessment. So basically, is it fair, and is it going to meet the learning outcomes? And I think the assumption is that we should do everything we can to try and come up with something that does work. So I've got a quote from Chris Tuck, head of Wellbeing, recently, when we were negotiating alternative assessment in the London Department. He said, a reasonable adjustment is only possible where the core competency standards are not compromised by the alternative provision. This was asking for alternative to the exam, which did go through. And it's usually only the case that it can't be put in place in certain practical assessments. But obviously we're really willing to have that discussion. And at the end of the day, as an academic member of staff, it's your judgment about whether or not the alternative assessment can be put in place. When it comes to current practice, this is something that's been raised. There are currently no guidelines to say, from that point of decision, who does what and how things work. Wellbeing is working on guidelines, so hopefully that will change fairly soon. But at the moment, in practice it's quite a new area, and we're all kind of feeling our way. And I know not every request has gone as smoothly as we would like. But what works best in my experience is, first of all, when the disability advisor and the department discuss. So hopefully the disability advisor will make a recommendation for alternative assessment, but then if that's not going to work, we can then have a discussion with you about why it doesn't work, and what else we can put in place, so we can find out the best solution. The other thing that's really important, particularly with the students at the start of the course, is that the whole teaching team is involved, because at the end of the day, the student needs to know, are they going to be able to get alternative assessment on their course or not? Otherwise they may drop out of university, they may change course, they may go to a different university. So I think sometimes individual module leaders make a decision, but then that postpones the decision for other modules later down the line. And I think as far as possible to have a global decision about what's going to happen for that student's course is really helpful if that's possible. And then the other thing is just looking forwards to make life easier in the long term, when modules are either designed in the first place or redesigned, to actually have an alternative assessment as part of the module. Not necessarily to be offered to many people, but to be there in case it's requested is really helpful, because then you're not going back to the drawing board every time you get a request. I'm aware that there are lots of issues and probably questions, and I just want to kind of open up to say what your thoughts are, what the potential problems might be with setting up alternative assessment, and actually how you think it could work.
Well, I think it's you want to be fair, and there's parity and fairness, but at the same time we're talking about how alternative is that alternative assessment in terms of ensuring that you're being fair to all the students. That's my main issue.
I think disability practice has kind of shown that you don't have to have something exactly the same to be fair. So with exams, if someone's getting extra time, they're not having exactly the same experience. And I think we'd apply this in, say, just because it's not the same doesn't mean it's fair. But ultimately, I think it's for academic staff to work out what's fair and what's not. We can't make that judgment.
Just going back to your original example with exams. Would an appropriate response to someone who could physically sit an exam for much longer than 2 or 3 hours, would an appropriate response be to break that exam up into small chunks so they do it in bits rather than...
Could be. Yeah, that could. In fact, I think that did happen for one module for one student. So the student had about 3 modules to be able to have an alternative assessment, and one module he went down that route, and another module he went down the route of Viva, and they both worked. Yeah. The other thing that I've used quite often recently has been a take-home exam of about 6 hours, which works well with some subjects where all the teaching is geared towards doing an exam. So if you switch the exam to coursework, it just doesn't work. Whereas if the issue is the time pressure and the student can take the exam away, then that's fine. But then the module leader really needs to write a separate exam for that student, otherwise there's issues of...
There's also issues with ensuring that the student's own work as well, that it's done away from the invigilating.
Yeah. As of course there is with coursework, but then, and that's...
With an exam, which can often carry a very large assessment rating, which is a bit more serious.
I think that's a perennial problem. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, there are some subjects where you could go through the whole course and never take an exam. And obviously, those courses, there is the issue of cheating. And then there's other courses which are very much exam-based, where that question comes up a lot. I honestly don't know the answer is. But I think we have to weigh that against the kind of moral, ethical issue about excluding a student from the course because they have a disability.
I'm wondering how you sort of make that decision. So I'm module leader for a postgrad module where we have a presentation of the assessment, and every semester there's at least one student who's incredibly scared of that presentation. And I hadn't realised that, about the alternative assessment process, but we've sort of managed to put things in place for them and support them so they've been able to I haven't had the situation yet where a student has just, not been able to do it. But I'm just wondering at what point do you, if you know that a student has a recognised anxiety disorder, for example, at what point should I be suggesting to them that they contact you and start that process going?
I think if they've got a severe anxiety disorder, recommend they come and contact us anyway, because there's lots of things we can put in place. When it comes to anxiety in presentations, especially for the student at the beginning of their course, we would not want to be saying don't do any presentations, because that's missing out on a huge learning opportunity. And as you've shown, often you can get students through. But how we would judge what to do would be based on medical evidence, based on their past experience, based on what they're telling us, and possibly a discussion with the module leader. But we would always look at how can we put support in place, perhaps mentoring, so they can get some practice with presenting and talking through issues, so they can get to the point where they can present. And it may be that we'd say at the beginning, perhaps you could be allowed to just present to 1 or 2 people, and then we can increase that. It will come down to the students' individual circumstances and their medical evidence, but certainly to send them to us. And if you're managing to get students through without coming to us in a way, and they're achieving what they need to, that's fantastic. We really want to kind of support that and encourage that too.
Well, they're in a leadership position as well. We're preparing them to be in leadership positions, which I would see having presentations as being part of that.
Yeah.
So it's very, so in a way that's part of the learning outcomes.
Yeah, and you might then say, this is the learning outcome to be able to present. Therefore, this is one assessment where we cannot offer an alternative because it's vital. And that's reasonable. But then we would look at, well, how can we make adjustments to the way they're presenting? Is there anything we can do, like we do with exams? You still take exams, but you get the extra time when you get the scribe.
I had a situation, I think it was a discussion with one of you over a student in that situation. But the problem was that it was a group work presentation. There was one student who you recommended should not have to do it, and it was also part of a key learning outcome because it was a skills module. And in the end, the arrangement was that they would video their presentation, and then it would be the video of the presentation that was shown to the rest of the class rather than them doing it live. And that seemed to be acceptable. In the end, the student was fine and did it as normal. But
I think that worked for you as well. Did you feel that?
It would have been fine. It wasn't in the end necessary, but it would have been fine.
Yeah.
And I think it can be really different. Sometimes we'll see students very frequently and we'll get to know them really well. But often we'll see students once, maybe, make our adjustments and then may not see them until there's another crisis or sometimes never again. And I think when sometimes people's anxiety, sometimes people will have generalised anxiety, but sometimes it can be anxiety around one specific or a couple of key specific activities, but it can be crippling then. And that level of distress that it causes, is really key to that sort of assessment. But it isn't, it's complex, I think. Student need. I think particularly with students on the autistic spectrum, often they will cover up what, it can be really hard to find out what's actually going on for them. And I think there's a lot of anxiety which won't always be evident until sort of at the point of crisis when things just go into meltdown. And it just sort of complicates things really.
I'm just thinking of from Katie's question, flip side of it really. When you lead for the dissertation and I look sometimes at work, the content I can see it's there, but of course how it's been, of course you're making the adjustment and the accommodation, but it is a bit of a challenge. I'll be honest, it is a challenge to again come back and say, look, am I grading this student fairly here? And I am looking at it because sometimes it's so disjointed and I can see and I'm looking at what the content is, but how it's been presented. So in terms of alternative arrangement, I'm thinking even for a dissertation then, whether this would be a step too far or not, in terms of even a Viva format where you get how well the student talk to you through the dissertation, and being able to present part of it in written form, is that something that would be supported or
I think
accepted?
it met the learning outcomes and, you know.
I think if you wanted to be even more radical and say that students can either write a whole dissertation or they want to write as much writing as you need to check their writing ability and do the other half orally as a viva and give it as a choice, that would be absolutely great from our point of view. Obviously, you need to check that met all of your learning outcomes and that is acceptable.
It also comes down to what you're actually testing, I guess, through the assessment.
I mean, we have had one student who actually not so much for ability to write, but from a lot of complicated physical disabilities and visual impairment was allowed to do vivas instead of coursework. He did a minimal amount of writing to show he could reference, and then he did the rest orally, and that was acceptable to his department. That wasn't a dissertation, that was a module coursework.
Is there a procedure for alternative provision, which is in model for students to sit? Does it happen automatically, or do module leader need to liaise with the examination unit?
But so once it's been agreed,
Yeah.
that point is a little bit murky at the moment. So we are working on guidelines. At the moment, I think the exams office has been involved in some situations. So where I've recommended a 6-hour take-home exam, the exams office actually had the exam and managed it and passed it on to the student. Where it's been coursework instead of an exam, I think the exams office just notified they're not taking the exam, and it's all done within the department. But we do need clear guidelines to make sure everyone's going through the right processes. Any more questions?
Are there any constraints from on courses which are externally validated?
Not necessarily. I think we need to be really clear, or academics would need to be clear on why they're arguing that you couldn't put an alternative assessment in place. And, you know, you would need to be confident that there weren't, you know, that you couldn't provide an alternative, really. Yeah. I think you just need to be very clear on what grounds you were arguing you couldn't do it.
Okay, I'll move on to digital accessibility regulations. Now, I appreciate perhaps for most people in the streets not the most exciting sounding topic, except for one or two. But actually, I think this is really important and huge for the university, and people are only just waking up to it. So just to give you a bit of background, there's a new piece of legislation coming in. The first part of the legislation will come into force in September this year. It's called the Public Sector Bodies Website Accessibility Regulations 2018. And what that is about is making all of our digital resources accessible to all of our students. And what that means is, so just to give you a concrete example, since John Henry Brooks Building was built, the university has spent huge amounts of time and money making the university physically accessible to students, because they realised even though actually the university building met all of the buildings regulations, it just wasn't accessible. And the same is true, in fact possibly even more true with all of our digital resources. We kind of assume students can access things on computers because they know how to and they'll be able to. But the reality for a lot of students is there are massive access issues. So for example, the most obvious would be if somebody is blind, they can't see the pictures. If the text is not text, it's just a kind of photograph of text, they can't read it. Everything they need will need to be text that they can read with a screen reader. But for other students, it might be something much more minor. So if somebody is colourblind and someone's just put a lot of colour that's not helpful, they might have a lot of difficulty reading and seeing pictures. And lots of students, for example, students with dyslexia will use text-to-speech software. Is that the right round? No. Text-to-speech to access written information. And again, if it's not presented in a way that their software can access, then they're not able to do that. Likewise, if somebody has dexterity issues, they might use speech recognition. And some websites and other applications work with that and others don't. Until now, the university's kind of not really taken much interest in this. I think partly because for lots of students, it's not a yes-no access issue. Students can manage, but it might take them 3 times as long. And students tend not to complain, they tend not to to realise they can say, actually, this isn't good enough, I need to do better. So students are being disadvantaged kind of invisibly. The other thing that's happened is where students have a major barrier, in the past there's been a lot of funding to pay for that, and to pay for getting around that. So we used to employ a whole team of people to make materials accessible for blind students. And then blind students would get a lot of one-to-one support with reading and accessing the library. A lot of that funding's vanished, so that doesn't exist anymore. And it's vanished because the assumption is now everything's digital, it will be accessible, but it's not. So it's a huge, huge problem. For students, when things change, it's going to be a massive advantage. But for the university, we've got this huge, huge task of making not just the website, but also Moodle, new student record system, everything that's kind of, it's not quite clearly defined what sits within the regulations and what doesn't. So we're not sure. There'll be some things which are exempt, but basically the material on Moodle, the new student record system and the website, pretty much certain that will be covered by the regulations. New information needs to be accessible by September, and then existing information by next year. So it's all happening quite quickly.
I was just going to ask what makes something not, apart from the examples that you indicate, what makes something not accessible? Presumably PDFs and Word and PowerPoint and things like that are okay. Is it just
It all
photographed?
depends how you use them. So with Word, generally Word is quite accessible for screen readers. You can change the size of the font, you can change the colour of things. But for example, with a screen reader, if you have not put in this, use the word heading facility to put in your uniform headings, then that will become less accessible to the blind student because their screen reader can jump from one heading to the next to get an overview of the document. But if you've just made your headings bold and not kind of assigned a heading, but I know that's sounding a bit technical, but it's very straightforward to do, then you make your document less accessible. Similarly with PowerPoint, I'm not an expert on PowerPoint, but there are big issues with PowerPoint. And I have heard that the Brooks kind of standard format for PowerPoint is not particularly accessible, unfortunately. So that's going to need to change. With PDFs, they vary. Anecdotally, some students who use screen reading will say to me, some work and some don't, and I don't know why. And often, one of the problems is you need a lot of technical information to be able to fix these problems because you need to understand IT to a much higher level than I do, but you also need to understand the issues of disability and disability software. So it's quite a skill.
So if there's an expectation that everything is going to be accessible by September, what's the university doing to upskill the staff so that you know what you need to do?
Question. I think we're a little bit behind, possibly.
This section is like this is the section.
Yeah, sorry guys, this is it. This might be all you get before September. I would just say in terms of what we have to do, by September the university has to make everything it can accessible. Whatever is not accessible, it has to have an accessibility statement saying this is what's not accessible, this is why it's not accessible, and this is what the alternative is if you can't access that, this is how you can do that. And here's how to complain if you have something not accessible. So in a way, higher levels of the university need to be recognised, and there are now meetings going on and discussions happening, and I think staff training is a really big issue. Staff awareness.
You have the link to the quick checklist on
Yes.
So that's basically a one-page document which just gives you basic ground rules, which we should have all adhered to anyway, but nobody did in the past. And it's basically using the styles properly and using all text and things.
Making sure pictures are labelled so
that's not rocket science, but looking back at all the material that already exists, it becomes a real problem because there's so much and most people didn't care about it. It's not any guilt or anything, it's just how it was done in the past. And there's lots of people recycle stuff from other people. So you get a PowerPoint and you add to it, and that makes PowerPoint particularly inaccessible. And all texts are a problem in themselves because if you have a complex diagram, try to put the information which is in the diagram into an alt text or a description of the picture, that is really tricky. And there are guidelines for that as well, which are more complex.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but what I would say is to change everything that's in the past is massive. And I would say don't feel that as a huge burden because it just can't be done. We've tried to do it for one particular student and it's huge. But I'd say going forward, two simple things to look at. One is use the library scanning service. The link you get may or may not link to an accessible document, but that's somebody else's problem to sort out and that will need to be worked on separately. So that's instead of just uploading articles to Moodle. And then the other thing is we'll email around the slides so you can look at the curriculum checklist. And Brooks is actually going to make their own checklist, which will hopefully be so good to start so everybody has some information.
When is that going to happen and how will it be publicised? Because sometimes things happen and nobody knows that they are happening.
Really good question.
And just a reminder, please, when you have your banner training, please ask about the inclusive support plan and how that's going to work and the information you disseminated.
I might, because I'll be in touch with the people who are working on this, so I'll make that point stand of this does need to go around to start with.
Because it is on stream, does it really get the work right?
What is the best method of communication? Assuming this is something you would want to access if it was available, how is it best to get that information to you? Okay, that's helpful to know. Right. Great, well thank you very much.
Thanks very much.